Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Hands-on JavaScript. Myself Hari, wishing all of my viewers a very happy and prosperous 2023. In this episode, we will build the homepage clone of Reddit using Material UI. And along the way, I'll explain every single line of code, and there are a few tricky corners which I will explain as and when we write those. As I always say, there is a lot to be taught and a lot to be learned. We don't have time to waste. Let's jump straight into the content. First things first, there is nothing better than building things from scratch. So let's scaffold a React application using create React app. Let's navigate to the command line terminal and do npx create -react -app, and let's give the name of your choice. I'm giving Reddit -mui -clone. The installation will take some time depending on your internet speed. And once that is done, let's cd into the folder, Reddit MUI clone folder, and let's do npm install react -icons --save, as well as let's navigate to the MUI home page. Let's take these commands from here and let's install the Material UI as well. So once that is done, let's open up the folder in Visual Studio Code or your favorite IDE. Let's do the cleanup first. So let's delete unwanted files as of now. Let's take out setuptest.js, report webvitals.js, logo.svg, index.css. Let's take out the default styles within. We don't need the app.test.js. Let's take out the styles from the app.css as well. Let's go to index.js, and there is no more the import here. So is this function called here. Going to the app.js, let's take out everything from here except the div. Let's do hello React. We don't need the import logo as well. Switching back to the terminal, npm run start. It will spin up a server in localhost 3000. So if I do localhost 3000, we have a bare minimum starting point. Let's install two more packages. One, the craco config, and two, the material icons for React. So let's do both using npm install @craco/craco at 6.4.3 and @mui/icons-material --save. So once these two packages are installed, that would be enough for all packages in this project. Let's do npm run start once again and make sure that the application is working and there is no errors in the console. And before proceeding, let's configure the craco config.js so that we can have relative paths configured accordingly in the application, which makes it a lot easier when it comes to importing the components. Heading back to the IDE, at the root, important at the root, let's do craco.config.js, and within which let me paste a configuration. Now this would be available in the GitHub repository by the time you would be seeing the video. So you don't need to do this by hand. You just copy paste and I'll walk through it. We do const path equal to require path. This is something which is available within the Node.js itself. So this gives us the path of the files, within which we have module.exports equal to an object which contains a property called webpack, which is again an object which contains a bunch of aliases, so that anytime we are importing a component, we don't need to do the // and go towards individual folders. Rather, we set aliases so that anywhere if we need to do src, we can replace that with @ or within the components within the src folder, we can do @components. To make it easy, we can add the respective folder structures now itself. So we can do within the src, we can have a components folder. Now this components folder corresponds to this one, and within the components, we can have a folder called main-content. Within the src, to hold our dummy datas, let's have a data folder. And within the src components, we can have a navigation folder to hold everything related to the NavBar. Navigation. And within the components, to hold all the shared components, let's do shared. And within the src components, I'm using one occasion where there is a styled components, else I try not to use styled components but sticks to CSS itself. A folder called styled components. For theming, let's do themes. For hooks, let's do hooks. And for custom styles, let's do styles. And for the context, let's do context. So corresponding to the configuration we have in the config.js, we have our corresponding folder structures here also. So there is a one-on-one correlation between these two. And as and when we start filling components within, we can do @components / whatever the name of the component, instead of doing the // folder name / component name. And before we proceed, one small thing that we should do here in the package.json, since we are using the craco config, we need to delegate the scripts to craco, which will run for us. So the first two scripts will be replaced with craco space start as well as craco space build instead of the regular ones. To test it, let's do npm run start once more, and this time you should see the craco config spinning up the server for us, which it did. So our configuration is working fine. Let's fill in the themes, the data as well as the styles so that we can get up and running. All these three things are already done for you, so you just need to take it out. Our purpose of this video is mostly concentrated on material UI. So the dummy data, the custom styles which I have written, everything is already made available. So it's just plug and play for you. Let's jump back to the IDE, and within the data folder, let's do app.data.js. Within which let's import some datas. All it contains is a bunch of React icons and some arrays and objects. That's it. So these are the data that gets populated at various places in our application. Similarly, in the styles folder, let's have a style.js, within which let me paste a bunch of CSS styles. Now notice these are just CSS styles. There is nothing more onto it. If you notice, there are some places where I have used media queries and some places I have used the material UI theme based styles. So if you are more interested in learning, dig deep into these individual objects, which are nothing but styles. There is nothing more onto it. I have just exported them as objects so that it becomes a lot more to use within the individual components and reuse them. To add theming, let's go to the themes folder, within which let's add the app theme provider.js file, within which let's bring in our imports. So let's import create theme as well as theme provider from the MUI/materials/styles to create the theme. Let's import React. Let's also import the gray as well as the blue colors for custom theming. Let's have our app theme provider component scaffolded. So this is nothing but a bare minimum React component within which we will return something. Let's create a theme by using the create theme method, and let's have const theme equal to create theme, which accepts a configuration object. It contains a property called palette, which is an object within which let's create a mode property. So we will eventually bring in the mode. There are two modes, the light mode as well as the dark mode. So if the mode is light, let's have a custom object configuration for light mode. Else, let's have another object for dark mode. So we will eventually fill those two up. There is another property called typography, which contains a property called all variants, within which I'm saying let's have a custom font family called IBM Plex Sans, which is the font used for Reddit. Let's fix the font size as 14 pixels and font weight as 400. We can also customize MUI components. So within the components key, which is an object, I'm saying I need to customize the material UI chip. Let's override the style of the material UI chip, whose color primary is overridden with the background color of blue of 400. So this gives us a bunch of colors. So blue of 500 will give us this color. Blue of 100 gives another color. So this comes from the material UI color palette. So I am choosing blue of 400 as the background color. Now I set the mode initially as light mode. Let's have the two object configurations which I was talking about. So for dark mode, whatever properties I need, I have put that into an object. So primary, divider, background, these are standard names, but within which you will also see things like light paper 2. These are custom names which is given by me. Apart from these standard names, we can also provide custom names. Similarly, apart from the background, we can customize the text color also. This background is for customizing the background color, whereas text is for customizing the color of the text. Just like dark mode, we have the light mode also. So within the light mode, the exact same properties here, but with a different value for the background as well as text for light mode as well as dark mode. So once that is done, let's return a JSX. So we get the theme provider from the material UI styles, and the theme provider accepts a property called theme, and whatever theme which we have created here, this theme is passed as the input for the theme. And since our app theme provider accepts a property called props, let's use the prop.children so that we can wrap our application entirely with the app theme provider. And before we forget, since we are using a custom Google font, let's go to the index.css and import the font from the Google fonts as well. I suggest copy pasting the same from the GitHub repo rather than writing this to avoid typos. If you wish, you can do the same for the app theme provider as well. Rather than writing it from hand, you can also do the copy pasting from the GitHub repo if that is something you wish to do. To wire up the theme to the application, let's go to the index.js and let's import the app theme provider from @themes/app-theme-provider. Now here is where our imports starts looking better. Since we have used craco.config.js, instead of doing the .. we can directly point to the @themes, which will take us to the themes folder. So @themes/app-theme-provider. Let's also import the CSS baseline from @mui/material/CSS baseline. Once we have these two, let's first do the CSS baseline before doing anything else, because this needs to be the first thing, so that CSS baseline brings in a bunch of global CSS which will normalize all the styles to make it work uniformly across browsers. Then we make use of the app theme provider which we have created here, and we wrap the application with the app theme provider. Now, if everything goes fine, our application should still work, but the styles started to take effect. Let's analyze the original design of the Reddit. So we have a NavBar, we have a SideList, which is this one. We have a join Reddit section here, and we have the main app content area here, within which there is a trending piece, there is a popular post, popular communities, and a bunch of cards, plus the user profile sections where we have multiple options. Now, think it's just not writing code. Whenever you are writing code, think how much you can reuse, how much you can modularize. So if you take a look at here, there is a nested navigation here as well as here. So whenever we are building, try to make sure that you create one component which can be reused across this section as well as this section. Similarly, functionality wise, if you take a look at here, this is a toggle menu. Similarly, this is a toggle menu. This is a toggle menu as well. So whenever there are functionalities that can be reused across multiple components, think of hooks and how you can delegate that particular functionality into hooks. Now let's start building this piece by piece. Let's jump back to the app.js, wipe everything out of app.js and start bringing things piece by piece. So let's start by importing the box from the MUI system, which is nothing but a container. We can decide what it should be. By default, a box renders as a div. Let's import React from React as well as the app.css. Let's bring in the custom styles which I have already written, which is available within the styles folder. And since the craco configuration is already wired up, we can use @styles/styles to point to that particular file, from which I am bringing this much amount of classes from the styles file. Let's scaffold our application, the bare minimum component, and within which let's bring in our react.fragment, which holds the entire layouts together. Let's have a box whose SX has applied a style of app wrapper, within which right now I'm just putting a placeholder for the navigation bar. Here is where the navigation bar would eventually come in. Let's have one more box with the SX pointing to the content wrapper, within which make sure you have one outer box within which you have two inner boxes. So the outer box has got SX of sidebar wrapper, and the two inner box, one having the scroll list wrapper which contains the sidebar list, which is this sidebar list, And the second one is for the create account wrapper, which is this one. So you have to put this exactly as this hierarchy for the styles to take effect. So within this create account wrapper, we have one more box that points to the SX having join Reddit wrapper, which contains the join Reddit section. This one. So as of now, you won't see much apart from an empty app, which we will fill piece by piece. So let's start by wiring up the NavBar. Within the src/components/navigation, let's create a navbar.js file. Let's start by bringing the imports. So let's bring in the app bar from the material UI app bar, box for layout purpose, import React from React, the toolbar which holds the navbar section, and the corresponding styles, app bar as well as toolbar wrapper. So once those are imported, let's bring in our custom styles from the @styles/styles. Let's scaffold a bare minimum functional component for the navbar, within which let's bring in the app bar. So I'm saying let's have the app bar, and the component it should render as is the nav, which also holds the SX that contains the custom styles from app bar. Within which let's have our toolbar, which contains the SX pointing to app toolbar wrapper. Within which let's have a box whose SX points to toolbar wrapper. Within which let's have one more box which contains the SX that points to the logo wrapper. Now, if you notice the original design, this is the navbar, this is the search, this is the logo, this contains the buttons, this is the user profile. So this is more or less what we are trying to replicate through our layouts here. So within the logo wrapper, as of now, I'm just putting a placeholder where this or here is where our logo component will eventually come. We also have a box whose SX points to the MobileNav wrapper. It is within this particular area that the mobile navigation. So if you go to the mobile layouts here, the moment you hit a certain breakpoint, there is the sidebar which we have here before move towards the navigation. So here is where that MobileNav placeholder comes into the picture. The sidebar goes into this particular slot. Right at the bottom of the logo wrapper box, let's have one more box where the search bar would eventually come. Let's also have a box whose SX points to flex, inside of which another box whose SX points to login button wrapper, within which the login buttons, whichever button that you are seeing here, these two buttons would eventually come here. Last but not the least, we have our user profile section as well. So this is our user profile section. This will be eventually rendered at this place. Let's build the logo component first. So within the navigation folder, let's do logo.js. Let's bring in the imports first. So typography and box from the material UI, import React from React, BS Reddit is a React icon, and our own custom styles from the @styles/styles. Let's scaffold a functional component, within which let's have a box whose SX point to flex align center, which is a custom style, within which let's have our BS Reddit of size 32, which is a React icon, within which let's have a typography component. Now this is a material UI component. If you go to the documentations here for the typography, you see that there are various variants. So if you take a look at the documentation here, it contains a lot of variants. if you put the variant as H1, this will look like this. And if you put like an overline, the variant, the text would look like this. So let's head back to the IDE. I'm saying the content of the typography component is Reddit. Let's have the variant of H6. So here we have corresponding H1 to H6. I need this variant. Also, it should render as a div. Let's have the SX pointing to logo text. Now let's head back to NavBar, and instead of the placeholder here, let's do logo. And we should do the imports saying at navigation/logo. Similarly, we should wire up the navbar in the app.js. So within the app.js, where we have our navbar placeholder here, I'm saying let's import the navbar, and instead of this lengthy import here, we can shorten this as at navigation/navbar. Now, if the wiring is right, if we go back to our application, we see that there is a navbar, there is our logo, and here is our base for the site list. Moving ahead, let's build the search bar. So if you go towards the navbar.js, here we have two placeholders, one the MobileNav as well as the search bar. Yeah, the other one comes a bit later. I'm going to take the mobile navigation towards the end of the course when we deal with responsive designs. For the time being, let's focus on building the smaller parts first. So let's build the search bar, for which within the navigation, let's do searchbar.js. Bringing in the imports, let's have the box, the import React from React, the icon button from material UI/icon button, input base, which is used for our search input, paper, search icon from the icons material/search, our own custom styles, the flex align center, search bar as well as the search bar inputs. Let's scaffold a bare minimum functional component for search bar, within which let's have a box whose SX points to flex align center. Let's have a react.useState for holding the search value. So const or destructuring search, the one which holds the search value, as well as the updater function who updates whenever the input is changed. Let's bring in the paper who gives the look and feel for the search. I'm saying it should render as a form whose SX points to the search bar. Inside of the form, let's have an icon button of type button whose SX is an object. I'm setting the border radius explicitly to 0. Now understand, there are some scenarios where I decide that it's not worth taking a particular style into the styles.js. So on that one-off occasions, it's up to us whether or not to take this particular object into our styles.js and refer it from there, or directly use it here. And since this particular style is only used at one place, I decide that it's better off I use it here itself. And let's add the area label to search. Let's bring in the search icon. Let's have the input base, and I'm setting the on change to a function. So whenever the input changes, it calls the set search and assigns the target value, so that the search is always up to date with whatever we have typed into the input. Let's have the SX pointing to a custom style search bar input. Let's have the placeholder set to search. Let's go back to the navbar.js and let's bring in the search bar here. Let's bring in the search bar, and the search bar is also within the @navigation/search bar. So if the wiring is right, we have our search bar here. The next thing in our list is our custom buttons. So here is where we take a step back and think, do we need to create separate buttons, or can we create one button and compose them together later? Can we pass in different props and customize the look and feel of the button, which is nothing but customizing the component, which is the route which we are going to take at this component. So let's build a custom button within our shared folder. So within our shared, let's create CustomButton.js. As usual, let's bring in the imports. Let's import the React as well as the button from MUI material. Let's scaffold a bare minimum functional component for custom button. This will accept some props. So I'm saying this will accept a prop called text, BG color for background color, color for the text color, spacing, which you will come to see a bit later, and whatever extra props, if at all we are passing. Within the return, let's have a button whose SX. Till now, you were seeing that we used to have a custom class which is being taken from the styles.js, but here is where I talked about putting custom styles within the component. This is also a one-off case, so I'm putting the styles within our custom button itself. So here I am saying border radius is 20, background color I need to customize based on whatever is passed from within the props. Whatever the color which is passed here is used here. The spacing, if the spacing is passed, then the MX would be set with spacing of 1, which is 8px, or else it doesn't have a space. And we set the padding on x-axis to 2 units. And I'm saying disable the elevation because I don't want the button to bulge out, but I need a rather flat looking button. The variant is set to contained. If you look at the documentation for the button, there is a variant for the button. So if you go to the button, the variant is text, contained or outlined. So here I am using the variant of contained. Pass in whatever props which are passed along for the custom component, and the text is set to whatever the text here it is. Now let's use the custom button within the placeholder which we have created in the NavBar. So the placeholder was here, the login button wrapper. Let's bring in our custom button from the @shared/custom-button. Let's use the custom button within our login button wrapper box. We use the custom button and pass in the expected props. So I'm saying the text is getApp, BG color is background.custom-button. Now, where is this background.custom-button coming from? If you take a look at the themes, here there is a background.custom-button which is there for the light mode as well as the dark mode. So based on the mode, I want the color of the button to be changed. So here I am saying background.custom-button. Same is the case with the color, text.btn text, which is also coming from here, text.btn text. And I'm saying please put a space so that there is a slight gap between the two buttons. So let's bring in the other button also, the custom button, pass in our parameters or props. Here I'm saying the text is login, BG color is background.custom-button2, color is text.btn text. Here also this needs some spacing after the button. So if the wiring is right, if we go back to the application, there is our getApp button and there is our login button. The next component in line is our user profile component. So let's go to the navigation folder, within which let's create userprofile.js, within which let's bring in the imports for the user profile component. There are quite a number of imports. So this component is not a small component. So eventually there will be discussions as to how can we divide this large component into smaller, manageable, reusable pieces. So we have our icons. We have the data for the list coming from the app data, the material UI components, which are box, button, divider, list, list item button, list item icon, list item text, menu. Everything is coming from the material UI. Then we have the React as well as our own custom styles from gray text, as well as the user profile min width, which comes from our styles file. Let's scaffold the functional component for user profile, within which let's have a box whose SX is set to an object whose PX is set to 1 unit. So padding on X-axis is set to 1 unit. Within which we have a button whose SX is set to gray text, which comes from our custom styles. We have an ID equal to basic button. There would be a few placeholders throughout this component which we'll fill. So as of now, the on click is not wired up to anything. There is a reason for that, which I'll come to in a short while. Within the button, we have our FI user, which is an icon. And conditionally, either we show the up chevron or down chevron, based on which if the menu is open or not. And the menu contains some properties. So SX set to margin top of 2 units, the ID basic menu, anchor element. As of now, we are not wiring it up with any element, but eventually we will. Open and on close. Open eventually would be set to a boolean, and on close would be eventually wired up to an event handler. Menu list props is for accessibility purpose. So this points to the basic button, which basically means which is the button that triggers the menu. And inside of the menu, we have our box whose SX is set to user profile min width class, within which eventually there would be a list item. So here is where we start asking questions. So here there is a toggle functionality. Here there is a toggle functionality. Here there is a toggle. So is here. So there are quite a number of places where the toggling functionality is spread across. So we will create a hook and we'll wire up that hook across all these components so that we are reusing the toggle functionality. So let's jump to the folder, and within the hooks folder, let's create a UseToggle.js file, within which we will create our custom hooks. Let's start with the imports. So let's do import use state because we are holding to a slice of the state. Let's have the scaffolding for a hook, and as the rule says, it should start with use. So we have used the use toggle and exported the function. We are using the use state slice to hold to an element. As of now, that element is null, and using the setter functions, we will eventually set that element. And I'm saying whenever that element is set, I want that to be a boolean. So I'm converting that into a boolean by using the boolean function. I'm having an event handler so that whenever the user clicks on it, the element is set. So I have a function called handleClick, within which I call the set element and pass the event.currentTarget, which is being passed from wherever the hook is used. I also have one more event handler for handleClose. So for toggling, there is opening as well as closing. So this is for the opening event handler and this is for the close event handler. So here I am saying set element to null, and to reuse the functionality, let's return whatever we need to return from this hook. So here I am saying, let me return the element. Let me return the open, which is a slice of state. Let me expose the handle click event handler as well as handle close event handler. So now we have our custom hook set. Let's jump back to the user profile and use the custom hook here. Let's bring in the hook using imports. So here I am saying import UseToggle from @hooks/UseToggle. And as the rules says, a hook can only be used within a functional component, and that too, it needs to be used at the top of the functional component. So here we import the UseToggle, and whatever we exported from the other side, we are pulling that out using the destructuring so that we can use these four within our components. The open we have already wired up before. So let's go ahead and wire up the rest of the properties as well. I wire up the handle click to the on click. I wire up the anchor element to the element. Wire up the open to the open property here, and on close is wired up with the handle close. And just to see if the functionality is working or not, I'm just putting some text here so that when we toggle the button, we should be able to see the test message. Now that it's done, let's jump back to the NavBar and let's bring in the user profile. So here let's bring in the user profile, and the user profile is from @navigation/user profile. So if the wiring is right, let's jump back to the application and we are able to see the user profile. And once we hit the button here, we are seeing the toggling functionality. So our custom hook is working fine, and we are all set to wire up the rest of the pieces in the user profile. Now let's start with the rest of the user profile. So if I scroll up, we know that we are looping over the user profile items. So if I go to the app data, search for user profile items. So this is the array through which we are looping over. So we have an object, but notice that the format of the object is slightly different. Now this is something which you might be recognizing if you have ever used MongoDB, which means that this is a NoSQL kind of thing. So here no two object needs to be exactly the same, but it can coexist with each other. So here I have a few more properties that you don't see in the rest of the objects. It will be a bit more clear once we start writing up the logic here. So let's jump back to the user profile. Let me loop over the user profile items. So we have our user profile array here, and I am looping over this. So for dark mode, light mode, list item, the functionality is slightly different. Let's loop over the user profile items which we have here. Let's return a JSX. So for each item in this array, I need to return a list whose SX is set to a padding set to 0. And within the list, let's have a key because we are looping over an item, and every time we loop over an array or a collection, we need to provide a key. So we have provided the item.id because each item within this array has got an ID property. And within this list, if the item has got a property called divider, then this would be that divider line which divides two list items. So we say, let's add a divider. Else, if the item has nested property, then we need to show a nested list. As of now, I haven't built the nested list, so I've just put a placeholder saying that if the item is nested, eventually we'll be putting a nested list here. Or else, let's bring in a list item if these are not the case. And within the list item, I set disable padding so that there is no padding inside the list item. And within the list item, I'm saying if the item is dark mode, so that I'm differentiating the list item with the rest of the list items, because if the item contains the dark mode property, I need to attach a click functionality onto it later. So here I am differentiating it via this property. So if the item has got dark mode property, then let's have the list item with the button click, the on click set to a context which is not wired as of now. So I'll eventually take that out. Here I say within the list item button, let me have a list item icon, and based on the context, if it is dark, show item.icon2 or show item.icon, which basically means if it is dark, show the other icon, or if it is light, show the dark icon. Below the list item icon, I am saying list item text whose primary. Now this is also if the context mode is dark, let's use one text, or else let's use some other text. So this will change between light mode and dark mode. And if it is not is dark mode, then this is a regular list item. So to show a regular list item, I am saying list item button, within which list item icon, and I say item.icon. The text would be list item text whose primary is set to item.text. And since we have not wired up the context as of now, I'll use something dummy. So here I am saying const ctx is equal to an object whose mode is set to light and toggle color mode set to an anonymous function. So if things are wired right, we see that the dark mode is there, the other list item is there, the nested list as of now we haven't wired up, but the other login sign up button, that also is there. So the wiring as of now is working as expected. We will work on the nested list item next. Let's analyze the functionality. So what we need is a list item, but a list item which is collapsible so that you can click on it and you can open the rest. The inner list items should align with the text here. It shouldn't have the icons, and clicking on this should toggle it back again, which is more or less the same functionality which we have here. And once we switch towards the mobile layout, what we have in the NavBar here. When we build, we need to keep these three things in mind. So let's build a shared nested list which satisfies all three requirements. In the shared folder, let's create one more component called nested list. Let's bring in our imports. So import collapse list, list item button, list item icon, list item text from MUI material, the inbox icon, expand less, expand more, which are the chevrons, and React. Now let's have the frame for a functional component. And since this nested list is a shared component, customizable shared component, let's bring in some props. So here I am saying end of the day we will be inputting some data, the icon and the text. So if you notice the design here, for the nested list, we need a certain set of data to be provided so that it loops over and populates all these inner list. We need an icon to be shown here. We need the chevron for the up and the down. And this is applicable here as well as here. So that is what we are bringing in through the props here. And within the component, let's have a slice of state called open, which determines if the nested list is open or not. Let's have an event handler which sets the open or close status. Within the React fragment, let's have a list item button which takes in an event handler of on click, which we wired up with the handle click here. Inside of the list item button, let's have a list item icon and populate whatever icon which was passed through the props. Let's bring in the list item text whose primary points to the text which was passed in. And based on if the status is open or not, we will either show the up arrow or the down arrow. Under the list item button, let's have a collapse. This collapse is the one which eventually toggles here. So collapse helps us to toggle. So let's bring in the collapse which accepts a few properties as well. So in should be set to our open status here, the slice of state. Timeout set to auto. Unmount on exit. So unmount on exit basically determines if the child components needs to be taken out of the DOM or not once it's collapsed. We loop over the data which was passed in, and if there is a data, then loop over the data, and for each item, let's return a list who needs a key which holds the item.id, and we are asking the list to be rendered as a div, and I'm saying disable padding. So I don't need any padding. Within the list, I need a list item button whose SX points to an object which says PL 9 units. So padding left of 9 units. Inside the list item button, we'll put a list item text whose primary points to the item.text. And that brings a wrap to the nested list component. And all that is left is to switch back to UserProfile.js and incorporate the nested list into the user profile. So let's bring in the nested list, which is available from the @shared/nested list. And let's come to the portion where we had the nested list dummy text and replace that with the nested list and pass in the 3 properties that it expects: the data, the icon, and the text. Provided the wiring is right, once we switch back to our application, now we see that there is a nested list which is collapsible. The next component in the list is our SideList. So let's fill in this placeholder component, which is the sidebar list component, for which let's create a component called SideList within the components folder. So this is not within the navigation folder or shared folder, but within the components folder, let's create sidelist.js and bring in the imports. So let's start by bringing in the data from the SideList items. Let's import the React package from React, box, divider, list, list item button, list item icon, list item text, and typography, all from the material UI. And let's bring in the nested list. So we are reusing the nested list which we have already reused in user profile. Plus we are importing the custom styles. Now that's done. Let's create a frame for the side list. So we create a functional component within which we have a box whose SX points to SideList wrapper, inside of which we are looping over the SideList items which we have here. So we loop over the SideList items, we map them, and for each item within this collection, let's have a React fragment which holds the key. If the item contains a key called subdivision, then show the divider, and beneath that let's have a box whose SX points to SideList spacing. Inside the box, let's have a typography component who accepts some properties. The SX points to the SideList item text. The variant is a caption, and we need gutter bottom so that there is some space towards the bottom. So basically the padding. Typography takes in the text of item.text. And I'm saying if it doesn't contain the subdivision, is it a divider? If not a subdivision. If it is a divider, then show the divider. Or if the item contains a key called nested, then show the nested list, which takes in the data, icon and text, which we have already seen in the user profile. Or if it doesn't contain subdivision, divider or nested list keys, then show a regular nav which contains a list which takes in an SX of SideList reset padding, because I don't need any padding for the list, within which we have a list item. I set the disable padding property as well. Inside the list item, we have a list item button. Within the button, we have a list item icon, which shows the item.icon which was passed in. We also have a list item text whose primary points to item.text. So that should be it for SideList, and all that is left is to jump back to app.js. Let's import the SideList from @components/SideList, and before where we had the placeholder for the scroll list wrapper, let's use the SideList. So if the wiring is right, we jump back to the application, we see that our SideList is up and running, just like our user profile here. Now that we have done the SideList, there is one small portion left, which is the join Reddit wrapper placeholder here. So let's fill that up. Let's bring in the imports. We import the colors from the material colors. We import the typography and the custom button from shared/custom-button. And within the join Reddit wrapper, let's put the typography which accepts an SX that points to an object of margin bottom set to 2 units. I set the variant to body 2, and I'm saying I need the gutter bottom. Within the typography, let's have some text, and beneath the typography, let's bring in the custom button. So this button was already created a few lectures ago, and we have used the same in the NavBar. So we'll be reusing that button here by passing the properties. The background color is set to blue of 300. Color is set to gray of 900. The text is join Reddit, and let's make the button full width. So if the wiring is right, and if we jump back to the application, we see that we have seen the join Reddit button here. The look and feel is different because we have customized them. This is of full width. This is of the width it has. And one thing to note is that since our layout is done accordingly, the scroll is just till this portion, which is how this is created as well. So this was one of the challenge to get the layout right. So it took some trial and error to get this layout. So if you want to learn more about this layout, please check the corresponding styles for this. Next, we move into the main app content area, for which let's jump back to the IDE. Let's create an app content area within the components folder. So within the components, let's have app content area and bring in the imports. So let's bring in React from React, import container from the MUI system. Let's scaffold a functional component for AppContentArea. And as of now, I'm just going to lay out the bare minimum structure. So I'll put the container whose max width is set to LG, and within the container, I am putting placeholders, 1 for trending images and 2 for popular post. So if we jump back to our original design, there would be a container as well as popular post section here. Yeah, so the trending today section as well as the popular post section. This one and this one. Before starting to build this trending post section, let's discuss some of the challenges that we are going to face. Now, this is an image and somehow we need to have a linear gradient towards the bottom. And if you take a look from the responsive design perspective, the moment you come down a certain viewport, the 4 changes to 3, and after some point, the 3 changes to 2 and 2 changes to 1. So we need to have some sort of logic where the image keeps reducing in its number based on the viewport. So let's split the design into smaller ones. So I am creating a cover image for the image as well as the background details, and I'm creating one more component called avatar for this one because I can reuse it here as well as here. So this both looks more or less the same. So I'm going to use this component over the trending post section as well as this card section here. Let's start with the easy one first. So within the styled components, let's create a component called CoverImage.js. Let's bring in the imports from import styled from @emotion/styled, and using the styled imports, let's create a styled component by using export const CoverImage equal to styled.div and the backticks, within which let's set a background image whose linear gradient is set to these values, URL, which is whatever which is passed into this styled components. So whatever the props passed, I'm using props.image URL. Width is set to 100%. Height is whatever which is passed into the styled components, and background size set to cover, and color is set to white. Padding is set to 20px. So that is our cover image. Now let's create the avatar component along with this. Within the main content, let's create one more component called AvatarDetails. AvatarDetails.js. Bring in the imports. So let's bring in the typography, box, React from React, as well as our own custom styles, and scaffold a functional component called AvatarDetails. And this AvatarDetails accepts some props. So let's bring in icon as well as user as the 2 props for the AvatarDetails component. And within the fragment, let's have a box whose SX takes avatar wrapper as its value. And within this box, let's have one more box as span, and let's have an SX, which is an object whose value is margin right set to 1 unit, and whatever the flex properties which we get from our own custom styles, we spread this across this SX. Within the box, let's set the icon, whatever which is passed in as the props, and let's have the typography whose variant is set as caption, and the value is whatever we pass in as the user. Within the main content, let's create a component called trending images. So within the main content, trending images.js, within which we'll make use of the cover image as well as the avatar details components which we have already created. Let's bring in the imports first. So we import box, import React from React, typography, avatar as well as cover image from the respective imports, one from the main and the other from the styled. We bring in the data from ImageCard items from @data/app.data, and we bring in our own styles from @styles/styles. Now let's scaffold a functional component called trending images, which accepts a typography component whose SX is pointing to trending image header, and its variant is H6 and its content is trending today. Beneath the typography, let's have a div whose class name is ImageBoxWrapper. Now make sure you use the name as this. There is a reason behind it which I'll come to a bit later. Let's iterate through the image card items and map through it, and for each item in that collection, let's have a box with the key of item.id and the class name of ImageBox and box with whatever the ID. So this is nothing but interpolation. So we are dynamically attaching some classes to this. So eventually the class will be ImageBox, box1, box2, box3, box4. I'll walk you through some of the CSS which I have written in a while. So let's complete this component first. So within the box, let's put our cover image, which accepts two properties, the image URL as well as the image height. The image URL is item.imageURL and the height is set to 200 pixel. Beneath the cover image, let's have a box whose SX set to trending image content. Let's have the typography whose variant is set to subtitle 2 and its content is item.header. Similarly, let's have one more typography component whose variant is subtitle 2 and the content is item.subheader. Let's also put the avatar details component which we have imported here. It accepts two properties, the icon as well as user, for which we pass the respective inputs. So that wraps the trending images. And I told that there are a few mystery here in terms of ImageBoxWrapper as well as ImageBox with this dynamic piece. Let's discuss more on that now. So head to app.css and paste in the bunch of styles which I have already provided in the GitHub repo, and let's walk through it. So this is a bunch of global styles for the image box. This is nothing but pure CSS, some flexbox CSS. So here I have an image box wrapper and image box. So these are nothing new. These are just CSS styles. And as and when we move from one viewport to other, I'm hiding certain boxes and showing certain boxes. That is all that I'm doing here in the 4 media queries here. On the mobile layout, we are only showing 1 and hiding 3. And as and when we move towards the next viewport, we show 2, hide 2. And when we are hitting the third viewport, we show 3, hide 1. And at the last viewport, we show everything. So if the wiring up is right, let's check if the logic is working fine as expected, for which we need to make use of the trending images. So let's go to AppContentArea. Let's import the trending images from @main/trending images because this is within the main content area. Let's take the trending images and replace the placeholder with our trending images component. There is one more step remaining here because the app content area is not wired up as of now. So let's go to the app.js and right beneath this box. So inside the content wrapper as a sibling to the sidebar wrapper, Let's bring in one more box whose SX points to content area wrapper, and within which let's place our app content area. And we also need to import the app content area at the top. So let's do that. Now that we have wired up our app content area and within which the trending images, let's go back to the application and see if the styles are taking effect. So if we refresh the application, we see that we are seeing our images. This has got a slight linear background towards the bottom, so that is fine. We are seeing our avatar details, we are seeing our messages, but somewhere at the bottom we are also seeing some messages from the place image. We'll look into it. Now if we switch it back, we also see that we can see the number getting decreased as we go down the viewport. So the message which you are seeing here, now that is because if you go to the place image from which I have taken the dummy images, it seems that the place image is shutting down as of June 30, 2023. So all we need to do is see where the data is coming from. So it's coming from image card items. So within the app.data.js, instead of the place image URLs here, you can replace this with some other place images. Let's do that now itself because the tutorial is kept up to date. So instead of the place image, let's try pixum.photos. So take this image URL, go back to the application, and instead of the old URL, I replaced that with https://pixum.photos/640/480. So all the images as of now have given the same thing. So if we replace that, let's see how it look like. So although the image looks the same, but we no longer have that watermark. If you want, you can try different images. In fact, it would be a bit more better if it is different images. So let's do that now itself. In the documentation for Pixum photos, if you take a look at specific images, you can add them using https://pixum.photos/id/ the photo which you like, the ID of it, /200/300. So what I'm doing here is pick and choose any photos from here, the number, and let's go back to the application and replace this with the URL here. So here I'm giving pixum.photos/id/1/200/300, 10, 20 and 26. So all are different images now. So if we jump back to the application, if we refresh it once more, we see that we have specific images. Now that the trending images component is done, the next on list is popular post. So let's go into the main content and let's create a PopularPosts.js. This would be a bigger component. So let's set the base first and create them piece by piece. Let's have the imports first. So import typography box from material, import React from React, and the data from data/app.data, from which we pull out the card content items. Let's also import the custom styles. Let's scaffold the bare minimum for the popular post component, and within the fragment, let's have a typography. Supply the SX property with popular post header. Let's have a variant of H6, and within the typography, let's have the text popular post. Beneath the typography, let's have a box whose SX points to PostSort container. Inside the box, let's have another box whose SX points to post section wrapper, within which we have a few placeholders. So at this point, we have a box whose SX points to the PostSort wrapper, within which we will eventually put the PostSort component. as of now, this is just a placeholder. So if you take a look at the design, we have this sorting container. This is what I call PostSort component. Beneath that, let's loop through the card content items. So for each item in this collection, let's return a card. For now, let's return a header. We will populate this with an InfoCard a bit later. Let's have a box whose SX points to communities wrapper. And here we'll put a placeholder for popular community, which is this one. And there is one more. We'll also put a placeholder for policy, which is this one. So let's jump back to the app content area. Let's bring in the popular post. And this would be from @main/popularPost. So if the wiring is right, we will see a few placeholders here. So we have our popular post header. We are looping through the card collection and showing some cards. And this is the area which is reserved for the other placeholders. The error in the console is because the popular post is lacking a key prop, which means that here in the H1, if we put a key prop, the error should go away. So if I refresh that, now it should not be showing any error. Let's start with the PostSort component, but this is also a bigger component. So let's start with the smaller components first and then put them into the PostSort component. Within the main content, let's create a smaller component called SelectMore. Let's do the imports first. So let's import React from React, button, menu items from the material. Let's import the 3 dots from the React icons. Let's import our custom hook and our custom styles. After which, let's scaffold the SelectMore functional component. Let's use the hooks at the top. So we use the UseToggle and extract the handle close, handle click, open as well as EL from the custom hook. Within the JSX, let's put a button whose ID is CountrySelect. Let's have an SX that points to SwitchLayout button, and the on click is wired to the handle click event handler here. Within the button, we need 3 dots. So we use the icon BS 3 dots whose size is 18 pixel. Let's put a menu, and the menu expects a few properties. So let's give an ID as CountrySelect menu. Let's do the anchor element and wire it up with the element which is already available from our custom hooks. Open is also wired up to the open property here. On close is wired up to the handle close here. Let's do a menu list props for accessibility purpose, and this points to the CountrySelect button here. So upon clicking this button, please toggle this menu. Within the menu, there are menu items. So let's put some items into the menu. So menu item, on click, handle close. The text is rising. The second one's text is most popular. And the third one's text is most watched. So this is our SelectMore component. And let's move to one more smaller component. Within the main content, let's add one more component called SwitchLayout.js. The pattern is exactly the same as what we just did in SelectMore. So let's bring in the imports, the React import, button, menu and menu item from the material UI, few icons from React icons, some custom styles as well as custom hook. Let's scaffold the component and let's bring in the custom hook and use them at the top of the component. And within the JSX, let's have a button whose SX points to SwitchLayout button custom style. The on click is wired to the handle click here. Let's have the BS fill menu button wide fill icon inside whose size is 18. And I'm saying if it is not open, show the chevron down icon. If it is up, show the chevron up icon. Let's have a menu. Let's populate the ID, anchor element wired to the EL, open wired to the open property here, on close wired to the handle close here, and menu list props which points to the button ID. And within the menu, we have a few menu items. So the first one is for the card, second one is classic, and third one is compact. Now I just noticed a small mistake. So let's change the name from CountrySelect to SwitchLayout. And let's give this ID here. And switch layout menu here as well. So that wraps the switch layout component. Now that the smaller components are done, let's create the PostSort component, for which let's go to the main content and let's have a component called PostSort.js. The process should be very familiar now. Let's bring in the imports. So from the @material/material, let's bring in the button, card content, box, import React from React, few React icons. Let's bring in our own custom components, the SelectMore and SwitchLayout, which we have just done. Let's import the custom styles and let's scaffold the PostSort functional component, within which let's start by adding a card, which contains the card content component whose SX points to card content wrapper. Within the card content, let's have a box whose SX points to the PostSort layout wrapper. Let's have a button whose text is hot, whose SX points to the PostSort btn1. The variant is outlined and the start icon points to SI hot jar icon. We will eventually fill another component here. For the time being, let's put a placeholder called CountrySelect. Let's put a button whose SX points to the PostSort btn2. The variant is outlined and the start icon is MD outline new releases and the text is new. Let's have a third button whose SX points to the PostSort btn2. Variant also is the same, which is outlined, and start icon is BI chevrons up and the text is top. Let's pull in our custom components. First, the SelectMore. Put a box whose SX points to the flex grow, and last but not the least, let's pull in the switch layout. So let's see how the PostSort component looks like as of now. So let's use the PostSort component within our popular post. As of now, there is a placeholder. So let's bring in the PostSort component, which is from @main/PostSort. And if the wiring is right, let's see how it looks like. So we have our hot button, we have our new button, we have a top button, we have our 3 dots, and we have our card, classic and compact selector. So our wiring is going fine. And there is one more component that we need to fill in the PostSort layout, which is the CountrySelect, which is what we are going to build next. Within the main content, let's create a new component called CountrySelect.js. Import the React from React. Let's import the button, menu item and menu from material. Let's import some custom icons. Let's import some custom styles and custom hook. Let's scaffold the functional component called CountrySelect. Let's use the hooks at the top of the component. And within the JSX, let's have a button whose ID is CountrySelect. Let it have an SX which points to the select country button and an on click which is bound to the handle click. Within the button, I'm saying Canada. If the open is true, show chevron up or show chevron down. Let's have a menu which accepts the ID called CountrySelect menu, anchor wired up to the EL, open wired up to the open, on close wired up to the handle close, even handler here, and menu list props which points to the button ID. Let's have 3 menu items. The first one, everywhere, and the on click is wired up to the handle close. Similarly, the second one whose text is United States, and the third one whose text is Argentina. So this is our country select. Let's jump back to the PostSort component and use the country select component here. And the country select component needs to be imported from @main/country select. And let's see how it looks like. So we have the Canada and the menu which can be toggled. Now that we have completed the PostSort component, let's move towards the Popular Community component, for which let's add a new component within the main content called PopularCommunities.js. Let's have our imports first. So React, accordion summary, accordion details, typography, all from the material, the expand more icons from the icons material, some custom data from @data/appdata, box, button, and link, all from the material, as well as our custom styles. Let's scaffold our Popular Communities functional component. Let's have a slice of state called options, and this options as of now is pulled from the Popular Community items data which comes from our app data. Let's have one more slice of state called more and an updater function called setMore. So if you take a look at the original design here, there is a see more button, and clicking on that, this will show the entire list of the community details, and clicking on less will show less items. So that is the functionality that which we are trying to replicate here. Let's have an event handler called show more, which does the set more updater here. So this will just toggle between a true and a false. Let's loop through the options map, and for each option in that, let's show an accordion. Let's have an attribute called disable gutters. Let's put a key called option.id because we are mapping through the options collection. Within the accordion, let's have an accordion summary which accepts some props. So the expand icon, we set it to expand more icon, and the area controls as well as the ID can be set to a string of our choice for accessibility purpose. Within the accordion summary, let's have a typography whose variant is set to overline and the SX set to accordion header, and the text is option.header. Beneath the accordion summary, let's have the accordion details. Let's have a box whose SX points to the flex wrap. Let's have a function called render tags and pass in the option.content. Why I am doing this is because I don't want the JSX to grow. Rather, I want to delegate some of the functionality to a function. So let's create a function called render tags. We are already passing in the option.content here. So we receive that content here. React.fragment is just for the wrapper. And for the collection, we iterate through that. If the more is set to true, we show the whole list of collection, or else we slice it and show the first 10 items. And for whatever the result of this is, we will show that many number of link which has got a key because we are still mapping through it, and the SX set to tag links, and href as of now is set to hash, and the text would be the item itself. Let's have a button whose SX is set to show more link button and on click wired up to the show more event handler which we have written here. Let's do if more is set to true, then the text is less, or set to see more. Now that we have wired the PopularCommunities component, let's take that component into the PopularPost. Let's put it here, communities, and this would be coming from at main/PopularCommunities. And if the wiring is right, we should see our PopularCommunities accordion. Clicking on that, this will show as of now the first 10 items, and if you click on show more, this will show more items. So if you click this again, this will revert back to the 10 items. That is the same case for all the accordions. Now that we are done with the PopularCommunities, let's move ahead with the next component, which is the policy component, for which let's create a new component called policy within the MainContent.js. This would be a relatively small component. Let's have the imports, the link as well as the typography along with the box, import React from React, our own custom styles. This time I'm not going to pull the values from the app data. Instead, this is just a one-off data, so I just wanted to use it within the component itself. So I have an array called items, within which we have a bunch of footer links. Let's scaffold the functional component policy, within which let's have a box whose SX is pointing to policy wrapper, inside of which let's iterate through the items collection, and for each item in that collection, let's return a link with some properties. So let's set the text of the link to item.text. Let's have the underline property set to none, variant set to body2, SX set to policy link, key set to item.id, and href set to item.link. Now beneath this box, let's have one more box whose SX is set to footer wrapper, and within which we have a typography whose variant is set to caption, and SX is set to gray text, within which we'll have our footer text, which is Reddit clone, INC, all rights reserved. So this is a very small component, and let's move back to the PopularPost. Let's bring in the policy.js here and change the import to at main. And we should see the footer here. The next on list is our InfoCard. So let's jump back to the IDE, and within the main content, let's create a component called InfoCard.js. Let's start with the imports. So import typography, box, import React from React, few custom styles, and let's scaffold the InfoCard functional component, within which we'll put certain placeholders and we will fill it up as we move forward. So let's start with the props. So since this is a reusable component, we'll accept a prop called item, and let's have the JSX starting with a box whose SX is set to InfoCard wrapper. Here we will eventually put a LikesWidget, and within this box, let's put one more box whose SX is pointing to InfoCard layout, within which there are a few placeholders, first being PostInfoContent. Let's have a typography within. The SX is pointing to InfoCard header, and the variant is H6. It holds the item.description. Below the typography, let's have a placeholder for video content, image, and link content. And last but not the least, let's have a card footer. So this is by far the biggest component. So we will take it piece by piece and address them into smaller, reusable, manageable components. Let's do the base wiring first, for which let's jump back to the popular post, and instead of the hard-coded H1 here, let's replace that with our InfoCard, whose key is set to item.id, and it also expects a prop called item, which we pass it down as the item here. And not to forget, let's import the InfoCard from @main/InfoCard. So if we jump back here, we see that our card is taking shape piece by piece. Let's start working on the individual components here. So we'll start with the LikesWidget, for which I decided to wrap every component related to InfoCard in another folder, so that within the main content, let's add one more folder called InfoCard content, within which let's start creating the LikesWidget.js. These are very small components. So let's start with the import. We import typography, box, React from React, chevron up and down arrows from React icons, and some of the custom styles which we have created. Let's scaffold the LikesWidget's functional component, which accepts a prop called likes, and within the JSX, let's have a box whose SX is pointing to LikesWidget. Let's have a up chevron. Let's have a box whose SX is pointing to an object whose MY is set to 1 unit. And within the box, let's have a typography, and the typography content would be whatever the likes passed into it. Below the box, let's have the down arrow, which is the down chevron button. So this is our LikesWidget. Let's move to the next component. The next component is PostInfoContent.js. So let's create one more component here, PostInfoContent.js. Let's start with the imports. So import chip typography from MUI material, import box from MUI system, import React from React, and a bunch of styles from our own custom styles. Let's scaffold the PostInfoContent. Since this is a reusable content, it accepts a prop called item, and within the JSX, let's have a box whose SX points to PostInfoContent wrapper. And within the box, let's have one more box whose SX is pointing to PostInfoLayout wrapper, within which we have a typography component whose SX is pointing to PostInfo header, and the typography contains few things, the item.icon as well as the item.user. Now beneath the typography, let's have one more typography component whose SX is pointing to PostInfo description, and the content is posted by the name of the author who is posted by, which we'll get from item.postedby, and the next typography component whose SX pointing to PostInfo subheader, and its content is item.timeago followed by the hours ago. So this basically says 2 hours ago or 3 hours ago. Beneath this box, let's have one more box whose SX is set to flex grow. And last but not the least, let's have a chip whose SX is set to padding in x-axis of 1 unit, label with join, and color set to primary. So this wraps our PostInfoContent. The next in line is our video content. So within the InfoCard content, let's have video content.js. Starting with the import, let's have our React as well as the box. Let's scaffold the component. So let's have the functional component called VideoContent, which accepts a prop called ID, within which let's have a box which contains an iframe. So all we are doing is rendering a YouTube video. So let's have an iframe whose value is set to width 100%, height set to the one which you want. So here I am setting 315. SRC is set to HTTPS www.youtube.com/embed/ the ID of the video which we need to display. Title, if you want, you can customize that as well. Here I am keeping it simple, so I am just keeping it as YouTube video player. Frame border, allow and allow full screen. So these are all the things which we get from the YouTube itself. Let's move to the next content. Let's create a new component called LinkContent.js within the InfoCard content. Starting with the imports, let's do React from React, link from Material UI link, box from MUI system, button from the MUI material, AI outline link from React icons, as well as a few custom styles. Let's scaffold the component which accepts a text prop, and within the JSX, let's have a box whose SX is pointing to link content wrapper, within which let's have a link whose href is pointing to the text which is passed in, and so is the content. Let's have a box underneath the link, and within the box, let's have a button whose SX is pointing to link content BTN, and let's have an AI outline link. So this is our link content. The next component is our image component. So let's do ImageContent.js. Starting with the imports, let's import box from Material UI box, React from React, CoverImage from @styled/CoverImage, and ImageContent box from our custom styles. So CoverImage is something which we have already used before in our styled components, which we are reusing here again. Let's scaffold the component which accepts a prop called image. Let's have the JSX starting with the box whose SX is pointing to ImageContent box, within which we have our cover image which accepts the image URL which is pointing to whatever which is passed in as the prop. Let's also set the height of the cover image to be 300 pixels. Let's add one more component called CardFooter. I know that we have been adding 4 or 5 components one after the other without showing you the entire picture, but once we put all these things together, the picture will look beautiful. So let's add one more component called CardFooter.js. This would be a very small component. So let's have the imports, the button, typography and box from Material UI, import React from React, our custom styles and our custom data. Let's scaffold the CardFooter, which accepts a prop called comments, and within the JSX, let's have a box whose SX points to CardFooter wrapper, within which let's loop over the CardFooter items collection, and for each item in the collection, let's have a button whose key is item.id, within which let's have a typography whose SX points to CardFooter text. It also has item.icon. Within the typography itself, let's have a box which is set as a span with margin left set to 1 unit. We also have item.comments. If the item has got a key called comments, then use this comments, else just use the text. So this is our CardFooter component. Now let's jump back to our InfoCard component and fill up all the placeholders which we have created as individual components. So let's import the components first and let's start filling them up. So let's take the LikesWidget, and instead of the placeholder here, let's put the LikesWidget. This widget accepts a key called likes, and let's pass in the value as item dot likes. And next comes the PostInfoContent. So PostInfoContent expects a key called item, and we pass in the item itself. Next comes the VideoContent. So let's do the VideoContent placeholder here. So here I'm saying if the item contains a key called YouTube ID, then show the VideoContent. So VideoContent expects a prop called ID. So we are passing item dot YouTube ID. Or else if the item doesn't contain the YouTube ID, but it contains a key called image, let's show item dot image. If it exists, then show the image content and pass in the image. If it doesn't contain YouTube ID and image, and if it contains the link URL, then let's show the link content. And once all these three is done, let's wrap it up with CardFooter. So let's do the CardFooter and pass in the comments property and pass in the value as item dot comments. So if the wiring is right, let's jump back to the application. We see that those which has got the image content shows the image. Those which has got the YouTube content will show the YouTube content. Those which has the link URL will show the link. Now, one last point, there would be 100 way of representing this info card. This is just one way of representing, and this is my way of representing this. Now, if you notice the app.data, here the card content items has been modeled in such a way as I have already went through what are the type of contents that we usually see from the real site and then modeled the data accordingly. So I just want to get it across the point that this can be done in a lot of other ways also. There is one more component left to build, which is our mobile nav. So if you go to the navbar.js, there is one more placeholder that we have put here long back. So let's fill that up now. So let's create one more component called mobilenav.js. So within the navigation folder, let's create a file called mobilenav.js. Let's start with the imports as usual. Let's bring the button, typography and box from Material UI, React and useState from React, a couple of buttons, our own custom styles, and the SideList. So notice that whatever the SideList here is going towards the top navbar portion here in the mobile viewports. So that is what we need to achieve here as well. So whatever the SideList we have here will go towards this place. So let's scaffold the component MobileNav. Let's have a slice of state called open so that we know if this is open or not. So if this is open or not, let's bring in the React fragment. Let's also have a toggle function so that it toggles between open and close. And within the fragment, let's have a box whose SX points to position relative. Let's have a button which accepts some props. So on click points to the toggle. SX points to mobile button wrapper custom style. Start icon is AA outline home. And within the button, let's have a typography whose SX is pointing to margin right of 1 unit. The text is home. Let's have a box whose SX is flex grow. And let's have a by chevron down icon whose size is 24. Let's also have a box. Now within this box will come our side list. So this box or this component is of absolute position. Within the box, I am saying if the status is open, then show the side list, else hide it. So that is our mobile nav. Now let's jump back to NavBar and put the mobile nav here. And this comes from at navigation/mobile nav. And if everything is right, let's go down the viewport a bit and we see our navigation bar jumped from the left side towards the navbar side. The next thing to do is wiring up our theming. So as of now, if we click on the dark mode, it doesn't do anything. So let's wire up the theming. Let's add a context and see how we can switch between a light theme and a dark theme. Let's jump back to the IDE, and within the SRC, we already have a context. So let's create a file called theme context.js and let's create a theme context within this file. So let's import React from React. Let's say export const color mode context equal to react.create context. So the purpose of this context is to hold the mode as well as toggle the mode between light and dark. So this accepts a configuration object within which I'm saying I need a function called toggle mode and a property called mode. Now that we have defined how a context should look like, let's implement the context, for which let's go to the app theme provider. Let's bring in the context. So underneath here, let's bring in the color mode context. And now we need to define the mode as well as the toggle color mode. Here we only have the definitions. Now we need to provide the values for it. So the mode is already here, which we have already done before. Let's bring in the function as well. So let's do the toggle color mode, for which let's go to the return section. Just before that, let's implement the function toggle color mode. So all this function does is call the set mode, and whatever the previous mode, just toggle it. If it is light, make it dark, or if it dark, make it light. We have implemented the function also. Now we need to wrap our theme provider with our context. Let's do that now. Let's take the color mode context dot provider. Now keep in mind, it's not just color mode context, but we need to use color mode context dot provider because we are providing a context. Now this accepts a property called value, to which we are passing our mode as well as toggle mode. So our color mode context dot provider has wrapped the theme provider, which means that our context is essentially made available to the entire application. And so from whichever component we can call and use the toggle color mode function as well as the mode property. So if the wiring is right, let's jump back to the user profile where we are making use of the context. We had our dummy context implementation here. So instead of that, let's do the real context, for which let's bring in the color mode context import and replace the dummy context with our real context. So instead of this dummy value, let's replace that with a real call to the color mode context. And so if everything is working, it should jump between the light mode and dark mode. Now if we jump back to our application and try toggling the dark mode, it should toggle between the dark and light mode. So the theming functionality is also complete. So one final check regarding all the functionalities. So theming is already working fine. The text is changing between dark and light. The nested list can be toggled. Let's check the accordions. If it shows all the accordions, it does. It toggles between the opening and closing here. So is here this works, scrolling works. What if I open a couple here? It also scrolls. Now if we bring down the viewport, this should go off after a certain point, which it did. This jumped from the 4 images to 3 images, and from 3 to 2, and from 2 to 1. And we are also able to see the mobile nav. So the functionality is all working as expected. If you have reached till this point, thank you for being with me. If you have completed the project, congratulations. When I started working on this project, the aim was to wrap the project in under 2 hours, and I have managed to meet that expectation. I hope you like the project, and along the way, we have covered a lot of important React concepts like component composition, hooks, context, theming, conditional rendering, just to name a few. Let me know your thoughts and suggestions in the comment sections below, and give it a like and a share if you think the channel and the content deserves one. Consider subscribing if you haven't done already. Stay tuned as I am working on something big on the React space. More on that later. I'll see you soon in the upcoming videos. Thank you and bye-bye.